Hi everyone, welcome back to KG Graves. We're in Congressional Cemetery in Washington DC and we're here to visit the law enforcement officer, J. Edgar Hoover. I hope you enjoy the video.
The Senate Crime Investigation Committee shifts its operations to Washington, where Attorney General J. Howard McGrath is among the witnesses. He urgently recommends new legislation to curb interstate gambling information. He is followed to the stand by J. Edgar Hoover, Chief of the FBI, who makes an eloquent plea for stronger law enforcement at the local level, where he says the real evil lies.
The gambling problem must be viewed as a phase of the entire crime picture. Organized gambling is a vicious evil. It corrupts our youth and blights the lives of our adults. It becomes a springboard for other crimes, embezzlement, robbery, and even murder. But like any other type of crime, it can be controlled. If the laws against gambling presently on the state and local statute books were earnestly and vigorously enforced, organized gambling could be eliminated within 48 hours in any community in this land. No criminal, the gambler and his allies included, can long stand up before a determined, intelligent, and informed public opinion. That, in my opinion, is the basic answer to the gambling problem. An aroused public opinion which will act on a local level through local law enforcement authorities to wipe out the menace.
J. Edgar Hoover was born John Edgar Hoover on the 1st of January 1895 in Washington DC, USA, to parents Dickerson and Anna Nee Sheetlin. He was an American law enforcement administrator. John did not have a birth certificate filed upon his birth, although it was required in 1895 in Washington. Two of his siblings did have certificates, but John's was not filed until 1938 when he was 43. He lived his entire life in Washington, D.C. He attended Central High School, where he sang in the school choir, participated in the Reserve Officers Training Corps program, and competed on the debate team. During debates, he argued against women getting the right to vote and against the abolition of the death penalty. The school newspaper applauded his cool, relentless logic. John stuttered as a boy, which he later learned to manage by teaching himself to talk quickly, a style that he carried through his adult career. He eventually spoke with such ferocious speed that stenographers had a hard time following him. John was 18 years old when he accepted his first job, an entry-level position as messenger in the orders department at the Library of Congress. The library was half a mile from his house. The experience helped to shape him, as he said in a 1951 letter, "This job trained me in the value of collating material. It gave me an excellent foundation for my work in the FBI, where it has been necessary to collate information and evidence." In 1916, John obtained a Bachelor of Laws from the George Washington University Law School. While a law student, he became interested in the career of Anthony Comstock, the New York City U.S. Postal Inspector who waged prolonged campaigns against fraud, vice, pornography, and birth control. John graduated in 1917 with a Master of Law degree. He was then hired by the Justice Department to work in the War Emergency Division. He accepted the clerkship on the 27th of July 1917, aged 22. The job paid $990 a year. He soon became the head of the division's Alien Enemy Bureau, authorized by President Woodrow Wilson at the beginning of World War I to arrest and jail allegedly disloyal foreigners without trial. He received additional authority from the 1917 Espionage Act. Out of a list of 1,400 suspicious Germans living in the US, the Bureau arrested 98 and designated 1,172 as arrestable. In August 1919, the 24-year-old John became head of the Bureau of Investigation's new General Intelligence Division, also known as the Radical Division, because its goal was to monitor and disrupt the work of domestic radicals. John and his chosen assistant, George Rouche, monitored a variety of US radicals. Targets during this period included Marcus Garvey, Rose Pastor Stokes, Cyril Briggs, Emma Goldman, Alexander Berkman, and future Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, who John maintained was the most dangerous man in the United States. In 1920, at DC's Federal Lodge No. 1 in Washington, D.C., the 25-year-old John was initiated as a Freemason. He went on to join the Scottish Rite, in which he was made a 33rd degree Inspector General Honorary in 1955. In 1921, he rose in the Bureau of Investigation to Deputy Head, and in 1924 the Attorney General made him the Acting Director. On the 10th of May 1924, President Calvin Coolidge appointed him as the 5th Director of the Bureau of Investigation. When John took over the Bureau of Investigation, it had approximately 650 employees, including 441 special agents. He fired all female agents and banned the future hiring of them. John was sometimes unpredictable in his leadership. He frequently fired Bureau agents, singling out those who he thought looked stupid, like truck drivers. He also relocated agents who had displeased him to career-ending assignments and locations. Melvin Purvis was a prime example. Purvis was one of the most effective agents in capturing and breaking up 1930s gangs, and it is alleged that John maneuvered him out of the Bureau because he was envious of the substantial public recognition Purvis received. In the early 1930s, criminal gangs carried out large numbers of bank robberies in the Midwest. They used their superior firepower and fast getaway cars to elude law enforcement agencies and avoid arrest. Many of these criminals frequently made newspaper headlines across the United States, particularly John Dillinger, who became famous for leaping over bank cages and repeatedly escaping from jails and police traps. The robbers operated across state lines, and John pressed to have their crimes recognized as federal offenses so that he and his men would have the authority to pursue them and get the credit for capturing them. Initially, the Bureau suffered some embarrassing foul-ups, in particular with Dillinger and his conspirators. A raid on a summer lodge in Manitowish Waters, Wisconsin, called Little Bohemia, left a Bureau agent and a civilian bystander dead and others wounded. All the gangsters escaped. John realized that his job was then on the line, and he pulled out all the stops to capture the culprits. In late July 1934, Special Agent Melvin Purvis, the Director of Operations in the Chicago office, received a tip on Dillinger's whereabouts that paid off when Dillinger was located, ambushed, and killed by Bureau agents outside the Biograph Theatre. John was credited for overseeing several highly publicized captures or shootings of outlaws and bank robbers. These included those of Machine Gun Kelly in 1933, of Dillinger in 1934 and of Alvin Karpis in 1936, which led to the Bureau's powers being broadened. In 1935, the Bureau of Investigation was renamed the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. It was not simply a name change. A great deal of restructuring was done. In fact, John visited the lab of Canadian forensic scientist Wilfred Derome twice, in 1929 and 1932, to plan the foundation of his own FBI laboratory in the United States. In 1939, the FBI became preeminent in domestic intelligence, thanks in large part to changes made by John, such as expanding and combining fingerprint files in the Identification Division to compiling the largest collection of fingerprints to date, and he helped to expand the FBI's recruitment and create the FBI Laboratory, a division established in 1932 to examine and analyse evidence found by the FBI. During the 1930s, John persistently denied the existence of organised crime, despite numerous organised crime shootings as mafia groups struggled for control of the lucrative profits deriving from illegal alcohol sales during Prohibition and later for control of prostitution, illegal drugs and other criminal enterprises. He was reluctant to pursue the mafia as he knew that organised crime investigations typically required excessive man-hours while resulting in a relatively small number of arrests. He also feared that placing underpaid FBI agents who had a starting salary of $5,500 in the mid-1950s in close contact with wealthy mobsters could undermine the FBI's reputation of incorruptibility. Although John built the reputation of the FBI arresting bank robbers in the 1930s, his main interest had always been communist subversion, and during the Cold War he was able to focus the FBI's attention on these investigations. From the mid-1940s through the mid-1950s, he paid little attention to criminal vice rackets such as illegal drugs, prostitution, extortion, and flatly denied the existence of the mafia in the United States. In the 1950s, evidence of the FBI's unwillingness to investigate the mafia became a topic of public criticism. After the Appalachian meeting of crime bosses in 1957, John could no longer deny the existence of a nationwide crime syndicate. In fact, the American Mafia, known as Cosa Nostra's control of the syndicate's many branches operating criminal activities throughout North America, prevailed and was heavily reported in popular newspapers and magazines. John created the Top Hoodlum program and went after the syndicate's top bosses throughout the country. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, out of concern over Nazi agents arriving in German U-boats in the United States, gave qualified permission to wiretap persons suspected of subversive activities. He went on to add in 1941 that the US Attorney General had to be informed of its use in each case. Attorney General Robert H. Jackson left it to John to decide how and when to use wiretaps, as he found the whole business distasteful. Jackson's successor at the post of Attorney General, Francis Biddle, did turn down John's requests on occasion. An example of J. Edgar Hoover approving wiretaps is the Nixon wiretaps, the Watergate affair. In 1956, several years before he targeted Martin Luther King Jr., John had a public showdown with T.R.M. Howard, a civil rights leader from Mound Bayou, Mississippi. During a national speaking tour, Howard had criticized the FBI's failure to investigate thoroughly the racial-motivated murders of George W. Lee, Lamar Smith, and Emmett Till. John wrote an open letter to the press singling out these statements as irresponsible. In the 1960s, his FBI monitored John Lennon, Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali. The treatment of Martin Luther King Jr. and actress Jean Seberg are two examples. Jacqueline Kennedy recalled that John told President John F. Kennedy that King had tried to arrange a sex party while in the Capitol for the March on Washington, and that John told Robert F. Kennedy that King had made derogatory comments during the president's funeral. Under John's leadership, the FBI sent an anonymous blackmail letter to King shortly before he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, indicating, "There is only one thing left for you to do," which King interpreted as an exhortation for him to commit suicide. In one 1965 incident, white civil rights worker Viola Liuzzo was murdered by Ku Klux Klansmen who had given chase and fired shots into her car after noticing that her passenger was a young black man. One of the Klansmen was Gary Thomas Rowe, an acknowledged FBI informant. The FBI spread rumors that Liuzzo was a member of the CPUSA, Communist Party USA, and had abandoned her children to have sexual relationships with African Americans involved in the civil rights movement. FBI records show that John personally communicated these insinuations to President Lyndon B. Johnson. Nevertheless, 3 Klansmen would be convicted in a federal trial for Liuzzo's murder in December 1965. One of John's biographers, Kenneth Ackerman, wrote that the allegation that John's secret files kept presidents from firing him is a myth. President Richard Nixon was recorded in 1971 as stating that one of the reasons he would not fire him was that he was afraid of John's reprisals against him. Similarly, Presidents Harry S. Truman and John F. Kennedy considered dismissing John as FBI director, but ultimately concluded that the political cost of doing so would be too great. In 1964, John's FBI investigated Jack Valente, a special assistant and confidant of President Lyndon B. Johnson, married to Johnson's personal secretary, but who allegedly maintained a gay relationship with a commercial photographer friend. John personally directed the FBI investigation of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. In 1964, just days before John testified in the earliest stages of the hearings, President Lyndon B. Johnson waived the then mandatory US government service retirement age of 70, allowing John to remain the FBI director for an indefinite period of time. John had been among those to suggest the setting up of the commission. Faced with a suspicious public, he wrote to the White House aide Walter Jenkins that, "The thing I am concerned about is having something issued so that we can convince the public that Oswald is the real assassin." The House Select Committee on Assassinations issued a report in 1979 critical of the performance by the FBI and its other agencies. The report criticised the FBI's reluctance to investigate thoroughly the possibility of a conspiracy to assassinate the president. When Nixon took office in January 1969, John had just turned 74. There was a growing sentiment in Washington, D.C. that the aging FBI chief should retire, but his power and friends in Congress remained too strong for him to be forced to do so. John remained director of the FBI until he died of a heart attack in his Washington home on the 2nd of May 1972, aged 77. He served under 6 US presidents during his career. His body lay in state in the US Capitol Rotunda, where Chief Justice Warren Burger eulogized him. Up to that time, John was the only civil servant to have lain in state, according to the New York Daily News. At the time, the New York Times observed that this was an honor accorded to only 21 persons before, of whom 8 were presidents or former presidents. President Nixon delivered another eulogy at the funeral service in the National Presbyterian Church and called him one of the giants whose long life brimmed over with magnificent achievements and dedicated service to this country which he loved so well. John is buried in the Congressional Cemetery in Washington, D.C., next to the graves of his parents and a sister who had died in infancy. John worked to groom the image of the FBI in American media. He was a consultant to Warner Brothers for a theatrical film about the FBI, The FBI Story, 1959, and in 1965 on Warner's long-running spin-off television series, The FBI. President Harry S. Truman said that he transformed the FBI into his private secret police force. Because John's actions came to be seen as abuses of power, FBI directors are now limited to one 10-year term, subject to extension by the US Senate. In his personal life, John never married or had children. He received his first dog from his parents when he was a child, after which he was never without one. He owned many throughout his lifetime and became an aficionado. He was especially knowledgeable in breeding of pedigrees, particularly Cairn Terriers and Beagles. He gave many dogs to notable people, such as Presidents Herbert Hoover, not closely related, and Lyndon B. Johnson, and buried 7 canine pets, including a Cairn Terrier named Speedy Bozo, at Aspen Hill Memorial Park in Silver Spring, Maryland. He lived with his mother until her death in 1938. In the 1940s, rumour began circulating that John was homosexual. He reportedly hunted down and threatened anyone who insinuated that he was homosexual. On the 2nd of May 1969, Screw published the first reference in print to his sexuality, titled, "Is J. Edgar Hoover a Fag?" John described Clyde Tolson as his alter ego. Both single, the two men worked closely. Also, they often went to nightclubs together, dined together, and vacationed together. This closeness between the two men is often cited as evidence that they were lovers. Some FBI employees who knew them, such as Mark Felt, say the relationship was brotherly. However, former FBI Executive Assistant Director Mike Mason suggested that some of his colleagues denied that he had a sexual relationship with Tolson in an effort to protect his image. John bequeathed his estate to Tolson, who moved into his house after he died. Tolson accepted the American flag that draped John's casket. Tolson is buried a few yards away from him in the Congressional Cemetery. Some associates and scholars dismiss rumours about his alleged homosexuality and rumours about an alleged sexual relationship with Tolson in particular as unlikely, while others have described them as probable or even confirmed. Still, other scholars have reported the rumours without expressing an opinion. Historians John Stuart Cox and Ethan G. Theoris concluded that the strange likelihood is that Hoover never knew sexual desire at all. Anthony Summers, who wrote Official and Confidential, The Secret Life of J. Edgar Hoover, 1993, stated that there was no ambiguity about the FBI director's sexual proclivities and described him as bisexual with failed heterosexuality. John kept a large collection of pornographic films, photographs, and written material, with particular emphasis on nude photographs of celebrities. He reportedly used these for his own titillation and held them for blackmail purposes. Anthony Summers quoted Susan Rosenstiel as claiming to have seen John engaging in cross-dressing in the 1950s at all-male parties at the Plaza Hotel with attorney Roy Cohn and young male prostitutes. Another Hoover biographer, Burton Hirsch, later corroborated this story. Others have expressed skepticism about accounts of John's transvestism. Many written works and theatre performances have been created based on John's life and career. John also received many honours for his work, including in 1950, King George VI of the United Kingdom appointed John Honorary Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire. Whatever he did in his personal life, there is no doubt that he did an amazing job in trying to solve crimes for America and made the FBI what it is today. Let's see where his grave is located.
There you have it, the grave of the law enforcement officer J. Edgar Hoover. As usual, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching, see you on the next one.
Rest in peace, J. Edgar Hoover.